May 1940. The Nazi war machine has rolled through Western Europe with terrifying speed. Within weeks, the German armies push into Belgium and northern France. The Allied defenses collapse. For the soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force and the French First Army, defeat becomes retreat, inexorable, brutal. By late May, an estimated 400,000-plus Allied troops are driven toward the coast, cut off from supply, surrounded, and with a single escape route, the sea. In the small, battered port city of Dunkirk, on boarded beaches and in open water, a desperate evacuation begins, codenamed Operation Dynamo. What follows is one of the most extraordinary and improbable rescues in military history. More than 330,000 soldiers saved from the jaws of defeat. This is the story of the Miracle of Dunkirk.
On 10 May 1940, Germany launches its invasion of Belgium and the Netherlands. Utilizing combined arms doctrine, fast tanks, Stukas, mechanized infantry, the German army leapfrogs the Maginot Line and slices through the Allied front. Within 10 days, the Germans reach the English Channel. The Allies find themselves outmaneuvered. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, the French First and Second Armies, and the Belgian forces are forced into a fighting withdrawal toward the sea. The German armor and air power sweep ahead, severing communication and supply lines. The Belgian army collapses. The French resources are stretched. The BEF becomes isolated. By 20 May, the German Army Group A has reached the Channel at Abbeville, cutting off the Allied forces in northern France. The trapped troops extend for nearly 50 miles between the coast and advancing German panzers. The situation becomes desperate. Rearguard actions conducted by the French First Army and the BEF slow the German advance, but only just. For many Allied soldiers, Dunkirk becomes the only point of escape.
In late May, the Allies' only viable port is the small town of Dunkirk, at the northern tip of France facing the English Channel. The German advance has cut off any southern or eastern retreat. The northern coast is the only remaining lifeline. The only problem, Dunkirk is under siege and its infrastructure is decimated. On 24 May, the order is given. The BEF and French troops must hold the perimeter while an evacuation is prepared. The town is battered by artillery. German bombers from the Luftwaffe strike port facilities. In many places, the wharves are destroyed and large ships cannot dock. Meanwhile, the French commander-in-chief, General Maxime Weygand, orders a stand-up defense of the perimeter. The British general, Lord Gort, commands the BEF. He communicates to London. "We are isolated and surrounded. Evacuation may be our only option." In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the War Cabinet realize the stakes. If the BEF is lost, Britain has no field army left to defend itself. The decision is made. The evacuation must begin.
On the night of 26 May 1940, Operation Dynamo begins. Naval planners aboard HMS Calcutta report that only the destroyers and larger ships of the Royal Navy can approach the port due to shallow water and damage to wharves. But the first attempt is disastrously slow. Just 7,669 men are evacuated on the first day. The German forces draw closer, and the RAF scrambles to provide air cover, but the Luftwaffe dominates the skies. The beaches are under constant attack from dive bombers and long-range artillery. The soldiers queue on beaches and piers, waiting for tiny boats and landing craft. Morale drops. On 28 to 29 May, heavier naval ships begin evacuation. On the night of 29 May, the destroyer HMS Keith and the destroyer HMS Bashful bring out 4,000 men despite heavy air attacks. The Germans, however, pause their advance temporarily as Hitler and his high command deliberate. This pause, controversial and much debated,
gives the Allies precious time. Between 26 May and 1 June, approximately 198,000 troops are evacuated. The bulk come from British units, though French and Belgian soldiers also attempt to board. The difficulty of prioritizing among national units causes tension aboard vessels and on the beaches. Lines of trucks are converted into pontoon piers. Men crowd 10 deep on makeshift boardwalks. Medical facilities are overwhelmed. Ships wait offshore. Smaller craft bring men to them. Many soldiers wade out into waist-deep cold water. Some collapse from exhaustion. The commander of one destroyer comments, "These are the worst conditions I've ever seen, yet these men keep coming." As the days pass, the number of small civilian vessels, known colloquially as little ships, begins to grow.
Realizing large vessels cannot reach all sections of the beach, the British Admiralty appeals to civilian shipping. On 28 May, over 700 small craft, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, lifeboats launch from British ports such as Dover and Ramsgate. They cross the Channel under threat of air attack. These little ships approach shallow coastal waters near Dunkirk and ferry troops to larger ships or directly back to England. Many carry only 10 to 15 men at a time, but every trip counts. The ferries zigzag among destroyed hulks and floating debris. The sea is foul, jellyfish sting, and the cold begins to bite. Many of these boats lack armor or weaponry. A captain of a 25-foot fishing boat later recalls, "We thought the war was at home until the bombs began landing around us." Their actions become iconic. Civilian courage intertwined with military necessity. Without the little ships, the evacuation would have been far slower, more costly, and perhaps impossible. By 31 May, around 338 small vessels have participated. They reduce pressure on the beach, allowing the larger craft to fetch greater numbers of men. The mix of naval discipline and civilian desperation shapes one of the most unique rescue operations in history.
This evacuation came at a heavy cost. Over 68,000 British and French troops were killed, wounded, or missing in the Dunkirk perimeter and the surrounding battles. Many ships, over 200, were sunk or heavily damaged. The destroyer HMS Grenade is bombed just outside Dunkirk harbor. Survivors recall how the deck flipped and men were thrown into the sea. Rescue efforts went on in open water amid fire and debris. On the beaches, wounded soldiers lay on salty sand, exposed to bombing runs. One medic wrote, "We treated men with pieces of shrapnel the size of potatoes. They died holding our hand, asking only for water." Meanwhile, German air attacks continued despite the growing naval corridor. The Luftwaffe dropped over 800 tons of bombs on the Dunkirk area during the evacuation. On 30 May alone, over 600 sorties attacked Allied shipping. But perhaps the greatest cost was leaving hundreds of thousands of French soldiers behind. While 198,000 British troops had embarked by 1 June, many French units remained. Because of shortages of small craft and prioritization, an estimated 40,000 French troops were captured or forced to surrender following the final collapse. The stand-down of the French rear guard was heroic, especially the heavy artillery units and colonial divisions, but also tragic. For many, evacuation never came.
By the early hours of 4 June, the outer perimeter is collapsing. German tanks are within 2 miles of the beaches. The Royal Navy begins its final withdrawal. Naval transports leave, some small craft still shuttle men back and forth. At dawn, the destroyer HMS Wimbledon picks up 600 men from a pontoon pier as German artillery broadcasts gunfire in the distance. At 09:35, the last major Royal Navy warship, HMS Burlington, departs. During these final hours, around 40,000 additional men are rescued, bringing the total to about 338,226 troops evacuated in 9 days, 26 May to 4 June. Across the Channel in Britain, church bells ring, flags are flown, people wait anxiously for loved ones to arrive. On 4 June, an exhausted yet determined Prime Minister Winston Churchill addresses the House of Commons. Why did Dunkirk matter? Strategically, it meant that Britain retained her forces. The defeat of France in June 1940 would still happen, but Britain could continue the war. Without a home army, invasion would have been far more feasible for Germany. Politically and psychologically, Dunkirk became a rallying point. The story of men saved against enormous odds served to unify a country battered by bombing and threat of invasion. Militarily, Dunkirk exposed vulnerabilities, the value of air superiority, the risk of ignoring logistics, and the cost of rapid mechanized campaigns. Lessons from Dunkirk would influence Allied landings, amphibious operations, and evacuation planning for the remainder of the war. In France, the fall of Dunkirk port did not stop the advance. By 22 June 1940, France signed an armistice. However, the evacuation meant that many French units lived to fight later. Exiled French generals would lead Free French forces from abroad. The German High Command's decision to halt the panzers on 24 through 25 May remains one of the most debated in military history. Some historians argue it saved the Allies. Others see it as a strategic allocation of resources. Whatever the reason, that pause granted the time necessary for gravity-defying escape.
In the space of 9 days, amid terror and defeat, more than 338,000 men were brought home. They came ashore battered, humbled, but alive. The evacuation of Dunkirk was not a victory in the traditional sense. Allies left men and material full of damage. But it became something else, a symbol of resilience. For Britain, it was the Dunkirk spirit, defiance, courage, and unity. For the Allied cause, it was a lifeline. As the war raged on, the memory of those boats crossing the Channel under fire, the soldiers wading into the sea, the civilians who risked all, that memory gave hope. History did not forget Dunkirk, and nor should we. In the darkest hour, the impossible became real.